We're going to get started in just another minute. Just give a little more time for people to join. And all right, we will get started. Hello to everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for attending today's panel discussion on the nurse's perspective on hospital cybersecurity and frontline patient care. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items to go over. First item, please note all participants have been placed on mute as the default setting. Second, as an attendee, you are unable to see the other attendees in today's webinar. And lastly, we'd like to encourage all of you to ask a question or provide feedback if you have any. You can use the chat function on the right-hand sidebar of your WebEx window. You can ask a question or give a comment at any time during the webinar, although we will reserve them until the Q&A session after the panel discussion has wrapped up. We know that your time is valuable, so we do appreciate you spending it with us this afternoon. We think you'll find this a highly productive use of your time. And with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. We have two distinguished guests joining us this afternoon. First up is Antoinette Thomas, the Chief Patient Experience Officer at Microsoft, who considers it her noble purpose to help improve the lives of patients and their families through data and technology. Antoinette has spent 13 years in healthcare information technology and 17 years before that as a critical care pediatric nurse. Fun fact about Antoinette, she's a fitness fanatic who is closing in on the Orange Theory Fitness 500 Club. Next up, Grace Jaime. Grace is the regional leader in the healthcare practice at Cognizant, a technology services firm. Grace brings a background as an ER nurse and hospital administrator. Her recent work has focused on innovation and technology. She served as the founding executive of several early-stage global technology firms. Fun fact about her, Grace is from New York City, born and raised, but says her dream job would actually be to have a farm with as many dogs and horses as possible. And last but not least is Arthur Young, the founder and president of Interbit Data, which is the presenter of today's event. Arthur has been a healthcare technology entrepreneur since 1997. He previously worked for Meditech, and he has master's degrees in both business administration and social work. But few of his customers or peers know that he was also in attendance at the original Woodstock back in 1969.
In my youth.
All right, and with that, we will get right into the questions for our panelists today. First question, we may not think that cybersecurity keeps nurses up at night, but should it? Why or why not? And we will start with Grace Jaime for this first question.
Thank you, Sven. And so I'm a nurse who's been working in technology for some time. And when I started to understand the cyber threats, what was alarming to me is that since the inception of COVID, cyber attacks on healthcare organizations are up 150%. In fact, just today, there was a threat that was released around fake sign up for nursing, for vaccination appointments targeted at nurses and healthcare professionals. Interestingly, healthcare accounts for about 25% of cyber attacks globally, and it's a $12 billion problem. So for nurses, why is this so important? It really is because nurses comprise the largest segment of the healthcare workforce. They're on the front lines at the intersection of patient care and digital. Yes, cyber attacks do invade EHR systems, but they also invade medical devices, many of which nurses use. There was in earlier in 2020, there was, many of you may have seen that the FDA recalled Medtronic's insulin pump because the vulnerability was discovered that nefarious actors could actually change the settings. So it actually provides a patient safety concern. And so as the digital landscape and more patient data is in the digital landscape, and that continues to expand, whether it's telehealth, portals, apps, wearables, nurses really are accountable for using technology effectively and safely. And this requires that nurses have competency in maintaining the data secure and in the care that they provide. And certainly, based on recent examples, cybersecurity certainly directs patient care. And most importantly, I would say the biggest takeaway here is having nurses have a voice in these programs. Really equip nurses with the tools so that they can effectively respond to these threats. The other nugget that I'll leave you with is having nurse executives involved in the decision-making process around cyber. Around 3 to 4% of hospital IT budgets today are dedicated to cyber. Nursing executives are leading the largest level of workforce in hospitals. And so it's extremely important that nurse executives be involved in any cyber programs. So thank you.
Antoinette, what are your thoughts?
Yes, and Grace, that was very well stated. And just a couple of additional things on top of those great comments that Grace made. First of all, she's absolutely right. There are going to be more sinister forces at play on cyber attacks. And it's documented HIMSS, which is a thought leading body for those of us in health IT, as well as healthcare, actually have a task force and thought leadership panel set up to address the what ifs of cyber attacks. So at some point in time, it's going to move from, infiltrating systems to get access to demographic data or financial data to perhaps harmful events on systems that are used to keep people alive or deliver treatments. And also along the lines of leadership and ownership. Interestingly enough, yesterday I was speaking via email with a CNO of a major health system here in the United States, asking some questions about natural language processing, or NLP, and what the future will be with NLP and nursing documentation in their organization. And she really just said, that's a great question, but the CMIO is in charge of that. So essentially the CMIO is in charge of something that is going to be used for nurses. How does that address why we should stay up at night worrying about cybersecurity? I think we just have to take ownership of always keeping it top of mind. And the tools that nurses are using today are digital tools, are pieces of technology, whether that is their electronic health record, whether that is an app on their phone that VPNs them into the system so they can document from home or check something. So these are important tools, just like your stethoscope, just like your IV catheter, or whatever sorts of tools or therapies that you're using to treat patients. So yes, it should keep us up at night. Yes, we should be thinking about it. And yes, we should take ownership.
Arthur.
Yeah, I would only add, we're in later questions, we'll talk more about workflows and impacts and all of that. But certainly one of the key issues of cybersecurity is it's about connectivity. It's about cyber attacks are based on issues that come from typically from the outside or from or impact your ability to communicate with multiple players, and that certainly is a concern. As we've tried to expand the information flow to many people throughout the organization, cybersecurity and cyber attacks are things that really significantly impact that. We'll talk more. I don't want to take away the present.
Yes, don't give away the plot, Arthur.
Yeah.
Next question. How do systems downtimes affect patient safety? And what about the patient experience? And Antoinette, you are first up on this one.
Sure. So I'm going to speak from the lens that I look through, which is patient experience. And one important data point to point out is that we know, it's very well documented, that nurses, and we're speaking about nursing right now, nurses spend about 30% of their shift time inside just the electronic health record. And that would be documenting, accessing orders or documents and results so they can do their job and do their work. So that's just the EHR. That's not the other systems or other machines that are driven by technology. That's just one system. So I think that number alone tells you that if there is a downtime, what that impact is on the patient experience. It's tremendous. The other thing I'd like us to think about is, we're probably going to talk with this question about downtimes, workflows, what do clinical staff do, how do they address this? But I'm thinking about this, and we don't tell patients what to do when they're experiencing a downtime, or the hospital is experiencing a downtime. We don't help them anticipate what that's like. So there are documented situations out there. You can search the web, and some organizations are very transparent about massive downtimes. Sutter Health being one of them, about the downtime that they had in 2018. And you can see in that experience, patients and family members stepping forward to say what their experience was. So before I turn it over to Grace and Arthur, I think it's not an answer, but it's a question to you all. How do we help a patient and family, our consumers of healthcare, understand what to do in the circumstance of the downtime? Again, using this device to access their portal, to conduct a telehealth visit, to look at their emails or their text messages. What happens when that goes down?
Grace, would you like to take a stab at that?
Sure. Thank you, Antoinette. Those are all amazing points. And what I'll do is I'll look a bit through the lens of what is happening to the care team during a downtime. So unplanned downtimes create very chaotic environments where clinicians, nurses specifically, have to resort to these very awkward, very rarely used protocols. And I think the biggest impact to patient experience and also to the care team is, as Antoinette aptly stated, they're spending a lot of time in the EHR. In a downtime, during the documentation process, you have clinical decision support. In a downtime, that goes away. In a downtime, the ability to understand the patient's story across an episode of care, that also goes away. So the patient's story becomes fragmented. And so what we're left with is having clinicians, sorry, my camera froze, having clinicians really trying to work with retrospective entry of information and really try to piece together that patient story. So from what can an organization do? Really, it's about making sure that they are able to practice very often what a downtime can do, conduct dry runs. And really with those dry runs, what you'll learn is you're consistently improving your plans and uncovering aspects of resilience and vulnerability. One thing that I learned that I thought was very interesting about the word dry run. So the word dry run started by firefighters, where they would practice fires and it was dry because they never opened the hose, right? And so I thought that was an interesting fun fact. But just as they're also looking to save lives and their work is very time dependent, for nurses it's very important to do these dry runs in a clinical care environment.
Who knew we would learn about firefighting history on this webinar?
I just thought that was interesting. The origin of the word. I'm like, why do they call it dry run?
Yeah. Arthur, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, obviously this is a topic near and dear to us because, we do try to provide technology to help to ensure that information is available. But a couple of points. One is that downtimes are not always the global event that happens at Sutter Health or something like that. But downtimes can occur with a lot of frequency in, just particular areas, a wing of a hospital or, a close building or for a variety of technical or non-technical reasons. So, downtimes happen a lot. And the other thing is human nature and downtime. And the workflows change. People are used to doing things. So as Grace was saying, there are seldom used routines, but again, in terms of patient safety, as we all know, that's where you may have problems because there are things that people are not used to doing, that the workflow, and again, without the intelligence to say, what's the next step, it has to be remembered. So there's a lot of risk associated with those downtimes. And, and the advertisement of downtimes, you wonder about the patient experience and patient confidence levels. And if there are, in fact, any people concerned about hospital finances, now patient satisfaction scores, which can actually impact revenue. So they're all questions about what happens and how well the facility deals with these issues can impact a lot. So.
All right, we're going to zoom out a little bit on this next question. And Grace, you're back to having first crack on this one. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed so much about healthcare and the kinds of technologies we use. What does it all mean for the future of nursing? Do you think we'll see a boom in interest in nursing, or will we see a staffing shortage? And what will the new generation of nurses be expected to know about technology?
This is such an important question. And it is, I will not do justice to the response in this short time frame. The COVID playbook continues to be written by nurses throughout the continuum of care. And I would say, when we look at nurses and the nursing supply, we are going to have 1 million RNs retire in the next 9 years by 2030. And so first, let's look at the long term, at the short term. The short term, we fundamentally, health systems and wherever nurses are employed really need to establish programs for nurses to establish tranquility, wellness opportunities. Nursing burnout is very real, and especially now. And there's a lot of information around rates of depression and suicide, which are much more prevalent, 3 times as much more prevalent amongst nurses, whether they're male or female. It's very, very, very high. And so we need to really support these valiant team members in what they do. And again, continue to understand the shortage, what that does to nursing shifts today with more work, expanded hours, a long-term strategy, and really start to engage in employee wellness programs. I'm seeing some more of this happen. Several health systems partnered with an organization to do this. Clinician burnout used to be a thing that people would think about, but not really understand how to operationalize. So I think it's about taking care of the workforce and then understanding what tools do they need. COVID created a catalyst for digital. And so we are not going to turn back pre-COVID to the way we were. So telehealth will continue. Anything related to AI and automation enablement, that will continue. And so I think when we think about the shortage, think about the well-being of nurses, we really need to think about load balancing and making sure that all of these new technologies, nurses will understand this analogy. We talk about patient-centered care. These technologies need to be centered around the nursing workflow and really allow nurses to work at the top of their licensure, allow them to communicate effectively because they are the glue of the care team, and ultimately help them prioritize the most important activities throughout their day. Because then we can eliminate burnout and we can really allow them what they need to do the best thing for patients.
Antoinette.
So,
it's hard to go behind Grace and answer this question. That was excellent, Grace. I'm going to take a little bit of a different perspective that's complementary to how Grace explained or answered this question. First of all, I just have to say this is a really hard question to answer because we are still in the middle of COVID-19 and the continuous assault that it is having on our hospitals and health systems and our frontline workers, nursing, everyone included. So first of all, our country and our nation owes them an extreme debt of gratitude. And it's hard to see outside of the forest when you're in the middle of the Black Forest. There will be another side of this, as Grace mentioned. So yes, once we're on the other side of this, nursing is going to change, delivery of services are going to change. I've been doing some work with the American Telemedicine Association, which is an organized body that really helps promote the use of telemedicine, healthcare policy around telemedicine. And so some of the things I've been learning over the last few weeks are so impactful. And what we know to be true is that many of these decisions about how things are going to be or the way they're going to go with the situation we're in now, Grace is right. AI is not going away. Virtual platforms are not going away. Digital innovation is not going away. So I challenge nurses, not just nursing leaders, all nurses, to start to develop a knowledge around these technologies, because when you develop a knowledge around them and an expertise around them, then you can actually move on to the next step, which is helping to make decisions about them. Decisions inside your own organization, decisions maybe at the state or federal levels. And that's what we need. We need a shift, and we need nurses to be involved at these highest levels of decisions so we can solve these complex problems. And it's not just the complex problem of COVID. It is the shortage that Grace mentioned. It is the burnout. It is how do CNOs hire for all of these positions in a talent pool that's retiring or burnt out and may want to leave. So that's my challenge. It's an answer to your question, but it's a challenge to those that are on with us today and listening, because nurses are 3.8 million strong in this country, and they make up the largest group of healthcare workers. So we have that power, we have that knowledge, and we have that experience.
Arthur, any thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, a couple of thoughts. One is, as Grace was mentioning, as Antoinette was mentioning, technology, even before COVID, we're seeing innovation in the area of, home monitoring and that kind of patient care. I mean, there's been a push for many years to get the patient out of the hospital, and that some of the technologies will be allowing that, but the role of the nurse really in monitoring that is going to continue. So, I mean, it's new roles and changes to what's going on that is really going to be a challenge. As there's always a challenge in terms of, revenue issues and costs. But the other thing is I mentioned before, we had a practice run, and I mentioned that my wife happens to be an instructor at several nursing programs, graduate and undergraduate, and she will attest that her students may get to view the patient record, but they never interact with the systems. And clearly that does need to be part of their training, because it's an expectation. If they're going to be spending 30% of their time interacting with the EHR, they should really get to know some of that stuff and have an opportunity to learn. And so, with any of these things, you can become more sophisticated over time. So and you get more use out of the system. So those are challenges that the educational system should be addressing. But I'll leave it
Ben,
there.
I'd like to make one more comment if I could.
Mhm.
There is a growing group of nurse innovators out there, and I think this is important because anyone listening now, whether or not you are practicing at the bedside, in an office, or you're a nursing leader, I think that this is a challenge to you and to share with your teams. But we're always looking for nurse innovators, nurse entrepreneurs. So there are two things that I'm involved in that I think might be helpful to our audience. And one is Johnson & Johnson sponsors a nurse hack for health. And Microsoft, my organization, is a partner in this. And we hold them twice a year. And we just held our last one in November. And we had 700 participants. It's over a weekend. It's all done on Microsoft Teams. And we come together to solve one problem. And it's actually, you're hacking and you're creating a solution, whether that's an app. Then there is a contest at the end and it's judged. So that's fun. And you don't have to know how to code to do this. You can just be a thinker and an ideator. And then the other is there's an organization called Sanciel, which is really an organization that supports nursing leadership, scientists, innovators, and entrepreneurs. And we talk about these relevant problems that we're discussing on this panel. So we may be able to share that with our audience somehow, some way, but I wanted to mention that because those are avenues for participation, and they're out there.
So important.
All right. And staying with you on this one, Antoinette, you have the ear of a hospital IT executive, and you have your nursing hat on. What do you think?
Yeah, I talked a little bit about that in a comment I made earlier. Nurses really need to either ask for more ownership, or they have a lot of ownership. They're owning a lot of things and a lot of problems inside those hospitals. But I'm a firm believer in not just stakeholder participation, so clinical stakeholder participation when there's IT decisions being made, but I think in some circumstances it would be appropriate to give nursing leaders a budget to buy and to lead the initiative with the support of their IT colleagues, especially if it's a technology that is mainly going to be used by the nursing staff to improve how they do their jobs and their workflows and the lives of the patients that they're taking care of. So I'm a firm believer in that. I'm just kind of watching these things as a nurse, but also someone that's in patient experience working for, one of the big American tech firms. And our nursing colleagues in the hospital need our help and support on the side that Grace and I are on, right? We need to be advocating for them. We need to sometimes force that conversation inside the health systems.
Grace.
Thank you. So I would actually like to share a story because as I was listening to Antoinette speak, this will really help put a bow around some of the current things that we see as nurses that are at the intersection of innovation, digital, and really trying to represent nurses. It's a privilege for us. And so as I was speaking with an IT executive, the IT executive said, hey, we have rolled out all of these new features and functions, and we're just, we keep on hearing, we've done what they've asked us to do. The nurses gave us feedback and they wanted us to fix the system. And so one of the things that we did is I suggested, as nurses always do, because we kind of just think of sometimes the easiest, Occam's razor, the easiest solution is the best solution is the easiest one to execute on, right? Mm-hmm. And so I said, let's take a walk in the halls where there's the biggest problems and where these rollouts happened. And we started speaking with the nurses, and the nurses were like, what do you mean you rolled out these new features? And the IT executive said, well, yeah, I emailed them to you. I emailed you the release notes and everything. And she's like, we don't check our email addresses because, oh, by the way, those are blocked by IT. And so I just thought that, again, this was just a great example of what happens, the miscommunication. And so you've heard us talk a little bit about, nurses are the largest segment of the workforce in any healthcare organization. And so IT needs to really understand they are the most important customer, right? For every one physician, there's 3 nurses, give or take. And really, in the last year, the response to COVID has highlighted the agility that's required to deploy digital solutions at scale with unprecedented velocity. And so when we think about where organizations have been successful doing that, it's when they involve nursing and they do day in the life scenarios. Because if you're a nurse in the ED, or if you're a nurse in ICU, or if you're an adult nurse or a pediatric nurse, as Tony is, your workflows are going to be very different. And so it's just very important that the IT organization treat their most important and largest customer with the dignity and respect that it requires. And when we're training nurses on these new systems, it cannot be in a classroom. It has to be in a patient room. And the patient room type they practice, because again, that really truly is day in the life. And so I think that really some of it might be easier than others, but it's about really coming together as 2 constituents to understand how to fundamentally improve the patient experience, ensure patient care, and ultimately have nursing-centered design for anything technology related.
And I have one more quick comment to make, Sven, if that's okay. Sure. Piggybacking on to Grace's comments, there are there is also, there is a demand, a need and demand for nurses who are interested in informatics, clinical informatics, and health information systems. So most of our CIOs are not clinically trained. They're not mind readers. They need those, I used to call them unicorns, but we're no longer unicorns, those nurses that are into technology. They need those people on the team to bridge from IT over to nursing. And just stepping out a little bit further from that is, I think we really need to make sure that our academic systems that train nurses are starting some form of informatics training, whether they're in university, a 2-year program, whatever that is. It's a necessity. And I know that there's a lot that they need to train the nurses on and educate them on, but as we know, these things are not going away. And it creates this new specialty in nursing, and we need to make sure that we have people that can help our IT leaders as well.
I would add, from my perspective as a technologist and as a social worker, uniquely enough, because I look at the environment, I've been around in IT for a long time, and the first systems had to do with billing efficiencies and all of that. We feel like we've advanced a lot, and we have, in terms of the EHR, but at the same time, there are many generic advances in terms of being able to access information, being able to do, electronic prescribing, which provides the benefit of, duplicate checks and all of the things that computers can do. But the impact on workflow, as we can all, as we all hear from users, has not always been positively, has not been seen as a positive a lot of times. But that we do hopefully have the groundwork now with our systems to then be able to move to the next level and to be able to make those workflow efficiencies that will actually be that much more of assistance to people doing their jobs. But again, it takes more communication. It takes also overcoming that resistance that people may have because it's already, impacted their practice so much. And again, not necessarily to their perception in a positive way. So this whole issue of ownership and of interaction and training, it's communication. There needs to be that communication. There needs to be more and more use of the technology to actually supplement what people are doing, because there's a lot of stuff that can be done. And we need to revisit that. Yeah.
All right. Well, we have one question remaining, but I do want to leave some time for questions from attendees. So let's consider this to be our speed round here. And if you could limit your responses to 2 or 3 sentences. Grace, we'll start with you. Does technology help a nurse's workflow or does it hinder it? And I think you're on mute.
Beg your pardon. It only helps the nurse's workflow when it enables optimized workflow, so that it's not making nurses do anything. The negative variables come into play when I'll give just one example. So password reset is the #1 support issue across organizations. So 30 to 40% of IT service desks is password reset. And so as a nurse, we need to figure out the authentication strategy that is amazing. I think, Antoinette, you said you use my biometrics, right? Mm-hmm. So that is the Cadillac of authentication. Of course, there's some baby steps, whether it's single sign-on or other things, but I think authentication is so extremely important because it creates so much process friction. Then we have big problems with interoperability. So do systems speak to each other? Because guess who has to enter it? The nurse. Yep. And so then you're adding administrative burden and taking time away from other, right? They're not working at the top of their licensure. So I think those are the two I would say.
Yes, and Grace, agree. I was also going to speak about interoperability as solution number one to help workflows. That's a big problem. And the government's involved in that and all over it, but it's still not moving at the pace that we need it to move at. Number two is technology moves so quickly. And so technology inside health systems is still in its infancy. I know that sounds like a crazy idea, but 30 years. So we're piecemealing together legacy technologies. And we're not being thoughtful about acquiring new and making sure that they supplement each other and work together. And I'm saying that from the perspective of working for an organization where I work in something that's very longitudinal and streamlined, and I can see the art of the possible. So when we solve that problem, we'll be more helpful than we are today.
Yeah. And I'll add just that, there is a tremendous challenge for technology there. There's a lot of capability that's not necessarily utilized, and there's a set of challenges that are being presented when you talk about authentication and all of that. And I won't mention the fact that my iPhone doesn't recognize me when I have a mask on, even though, you know, that nice authentication by face. But anyway, I forgot my point, but technology, we're trying to ensure the ability to share information among the care team and among this hospital that's joined with that hospital group and yet we have to protect against, release of PHI. We have to protect against cyber people, cyber criminals. So there are all of these areas that are conflicting, and it impacts people's workflow because I have to authenticate 6 times to do something, and that's because I'm ensuring this. There's a lot of challenges there that are really massive. And if I can say one pet peeve, which is also global, I work in Canada, I work in the US. Canadians have a personal insurance number that can consolidate information, and that this person is this person. The amount of time that's spent trying to reconcile medical record numbers and all of that is just, there should be a government solution to that, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much to our panelists. At this time, we will open the floor to our attendees. If you have a question, you can either type it in the chat function on the right-hand side of your WebEx window or raise your hand and we can unmute you to allow you to ask it verbally. And I think we have our first question. We're going to let someone ask it. Is that correct?
Yep.
Go ahead.
It's like one of those call-in shows.
Okay. It looks like we have it in writing. I can just read it. We have someone who identifies herself having worked many years as a nurse case manager. I can attest to the criticality of having uninterrupted access to every clinical system that touches my patients. Without that information, patient safety is at significant risk. Huge disruptions to clinical workflows, increased patient wait time, general frustration, et cetera. We've talked about a lot of that. Her question is, how do you engage your nursing staff to think proactively and prepare a step-by-step plan that can be executed across the organization in a matter of minutes once a downtime hits? Who'd like to take that one first?
Grace, you still there?
So yes, I am. I am. So one of the things that the reason why I'm taking this question is because in my career, I have done hundreds of go lives, hundreds, literally. But let's not do the math because then we can guess my age. And so what I think what we don't do is to the point of we spend so much time on go live prep and go live planning. We don't do enough around preparing for a downtime, an unplanned downtime. So just as nurses, we do a lot of planning for patient care incidents, code blues, et cetera. It's equally as important that we apply that same sense of rigor and that same sense of urgency and priority towards downtime. And the reason why it's more important now than ever is because cyber attacks are on the rise, right? We just said that it's up 150%. Now, if we know that, then we also know that it can lead to more downtimes. Your system can be brought down. And so that's why it's so important to have those dry runs that we spoke about. One interesting fact that I learned recently, and I was speaking to my son because I was actually the victim of having my information compromised. And my son was talking about, the black market and this and that. And I was like, you're 13. How do you know this? And so I just started looking into it. And what I thought was fascinating, without getting into all the details, is that health information is 50 times more valuable on the black market than a social security number. So if a social security number costs $1, health information costs $50 on the black market. So if we think about the nefarious value or the street value of it, we can understand the magnitude of the problem. And that problem, cyber risk, is what's going to lead to your downtimes, right? And so I would ask us to think about it in that way.
Antoinette, anything to add?
Yeah, just a couple comments about, we're seeing now chief security officers in our health systems on committees around cybersecurity, and that's great. I'd like to see even more attention paid to those things, because that's where the strategy around security is going to come from. And Grace is absolutely right. All sorts of planning and resources are put into implementations and deployments, but what happens after those is as not, if more than, important. So I think if you're a nurse and you're trying to you have a plan or you want to participate in that planning somehow, that's a place you can start. And then challenge those people in cybersecurity within your organization. We need nurses on those committees, and not just people that are techies.
I would just add two things. One is, planning is key, and recognizing that a system downtime versus a cyber downtime may in fact be very different, because in a system downtime, you may still have your computer, and in a cyber downtime, your computer may be a paperweight, and there's a real difference in terms of contingencies and plans. But ultimately, and again, my jaded experience for many years in healthcare, one of the reasons there hasn't been more a light fired under this is that the licensing agencies, certification boards, all of that, they are very concerned when they look at your information system. They're very concerned about not losing patient data and making sure that the information that you've captured is non-volatile. But they're not asking the questions about what do you do if you don't have access to it? You know, what do you do if there's a downtime? And I would say that it's equally important, you know, especially as it impacts the patient. I mean, not to dismiss data integrity, but yeah, so what do you do when there's that gap, and how are you fulfilling that? And you know, I think we've all seen the furor when you hear JCHO is coming to the hospital, you know, and everybody being quick to make sure everything was done. But, you know, so maybe if downtimes were looked at also, there would be, you know, more of an impact to make sure that you had these things together.
All right. As a reminder, you can use the chat function to enter a question if you have one or a comment. We have another question here, and it's about recommendations for strategies to get nurse buy-in for new technology investments. Antoinette, would you like to take that one first, since Grace went first last time?
Sure. So repeat the question again, please.
Can you recommend any strategies for getting nurse buy-in for new technology investments?
I would have to say, and I know this is a really, really hard job, and a big ask of nursing leadership, whether that's from CNO or unit managers, whatever that may be, we have got to get the bedside nurses involved in this. Because we're in a vicious cycle. Grace and I have seen this over the years. We get in a vicious cycle. Like we said, the technology is there. It's not going away. We know we use it to do our jobs, but yet decisions are made inside a bubble. And then the technology is, the nurses see it as something that they have to do and not something that they own or are involved in. So somehow, some way, we have to integrate the people at the bedside that are doing the job into the decisions. And that's hard because they're so distracted and so overwhelmed by the job that they do on a daily basis that that's the last thing on their minds. But we have to do it.
Grace, do you have anything to add to that?
I would agree with Antoinette wholeheartedly. We've seen this. Worst case scenario is, you know, the nurses feeling like it's being done to them, and so what's very important is to engage bedside nursing, the actual users of technology, engage them early, engage them, and garner their feedback. You know, you in an organization as an executive, if you invest in IT and no one uses it, you don't have ROI. And so the most expensive technology is the one that no one uses. And so and that can be even technology for patients, right? Even if the technology is for patients, because nurses spend the most time with patients and they can be the ones that are helping patients use the technology. What I would also say is have plans for nursing and other parts of the organization where nurses are not required to do the QA and the fixes of the technology, because it's either at the bedside or it's not somewhere in a server room. So I think it's very important to understand and have the nurses always work at the top of their licensure and get the IT organization out of the, you know, onto the patient floors to do the QA checks of equipment and devices, so that nurses don't have to do that. And that's how having a very clear process of who is doing what and really supporting the nurse's scope of practice will very much garner adoption of technology so that they understand what the protocol is when something goes wrong.
I think another important point, and Grace and I are on the side of this, is that if you are a nursing leader or a nurse on a committee, whatever your role is inside the hospital, and you're looking at new technologies, you need to ask the companies, I want to speak to a nurse on their team. I want to speak to a clinician on their team. I want a vendor clinician, vendor nurse involved in these discussions. Because oftentimes sometimes I don't know if they realize that, healthcare IT companies have clinicians that work for them, and we are working on their behalf. Yes, we work for a company that builds technology, but we're there for a reason, and the reason is them. So we work really hard, and we view ourselves, we still practice nursing. Grace and I still practice nursing, but we practice it in a different environment, in a different way. And we are their voice to people who are designing products or strategic leaders, high-level leaders in our companies that are deciding on strategies for the technology. So we are an extension of their voice, and we ask that you please take advantage of us.
That was great.
The only thing that I would add, again, as just seeing what's been happening for a long time, the whole process of introducing technology, the training process, it's so critical. And it's something that needs to be more individualized because, as we've learned in all areas of education, different people think differently. And especially when you're trying to change the way people do things and change habits, you really need to reinforce that and to, to help them to practice and to see success. And, and everybody's rushed,
Mm-hmm.
so it's not like people have the time to do it the right way. They may all have, but again, that's what impacts the utilization of the technology is, getting that buy-in, having people appreciate the benefits that they can get from it. So it's tough.
All right, and we're going to wrap it up here as we're running a little bit late on time, but I did want to thank our two guest panelists today, Grace Jaime from Cognizant and Antoinette Thomas from Microsoft. And on behalf of all of us here at Interbit Data, we would like to thank you so much for joining us today, everybody on the call. If you'd like more information about Interbit Data, you can go to their website, interbitdata.com, or send an email to info@interbitdata.com. And we hope that everyone has a great afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Thank you.
Stay healthy.